at this particular moment, it does not appear that World War III has yet kicked off in Syria. Although, the situation over there is tense enough and complex enough that it might. I don't know how many countries are involved at this point or soon to be involved. I think it's like 8. And pretty much all the world's nuclear powers except for India and Pakistan, although, there's still time, maybe they'll throw their hat into the ring too. Why Syria, though? Why would the U.S. be so concerned about Syria? Well, we know that the Israelis don't like secular strongmen in their neighborhood. They don't like any kind of unified, politically stable Arab regimes anywhere near them. They'd rather have chaos. They'd rather have fourth-generation warfare. They'd rather have terrorist cells battling it out in the streets. Because that's something you can keep out of your country with, little more than a wall and aggressive law enforcement. We don't keep that out of the West because we're fucking stupid. But in principle, it's not that hard. And the Israelis don't seem to have much trouble with that. So they don't like the secular strongmen. They didn't like Saddam. They don't like Assad. And, they don't like any coherent, stable, regional adversaries. And that seems to be the main motivator for American foreign policy in that part of the world. We know AIPAC has been agitating for war with Syria in the U.S. for years. They've had their lobbyists on it, they've had their money on it, and we can only assume that they've lent their power in influencing narratives and shaping and distributing narratives to those ends. Through their control of the news and media and entertainment and other things. It's the same story with Iraq. You had a huge effort, a huge public relations effort to build up American support for war in Iraq back in 2003. And, concurrent to this, you had the government stuff going on. The yellow cake nonsense and the weapons of mass destruction nonsense and Colin Powell in front of the UN nonsense and all of it. But that was matched by punditry from neocon public intellectuals who were endlessly making the case for war to the American people. And that, same thing's going on now with Syria. So, why does Israel have so much influence in America? Well, we know some of the reasons. We know how they acquire their wealth and influence and power over, secular institutions as well as government. And that's a big part of it. Maybe the biggest part, but there's another part as well, which is maybe less well understood or less well known, and that's Israel's status as a nuclear power. Israel officially, unofficially has nuclear weapons. Meaning they have them, everybody knows they have them. They don't publicly admit to having them, which is kind of odd because, a nuclear deterrent works best if it's publicized, right? So if everyone knows about it, then it's a more effective deterrent than if there's ambiguity. At least generally speaking. But, one possibility is raised by something called the Samson Option, and this is something that various people have mentioned at various times. Influential Israelis have let this slip, perhaps deliberately, about the existence of something called the Samson Option. And the basic idea here is if Israel goes down, they're taking the West with them, especially Europe, presumably also America, using their nuclear weapons. In other words, if you let us fall, we're bringing it all down. And so the nuclear deterrent, in Israel's case, is not only against their enemies, or maybe not even mainly against their enemies, but against their allies as well. It's basically an extortion racket. I don't think anybody has problems with retaliation or with mutually assured destruction or like a basically retaliatory stance, right? If you attack us, we'll attack you. If you hurt us, we'll hurt you. Right? People are basically sympathetic to that. That's sovereignty. That's what sovereign entities do. But, that's productive, because people are taking the risk of sovereignty upon themselves. They're taking the risk and they're paying the cost of enforcing their sovereignty by putting up a credible threat of retaliation. Nobody has a problem with that. That's just how it works. That's just what happens. But I guess the Israelis, for some odd reason, even something as unobjectionable as sovereignty, they have to give a parasitic hue. Right? It's not just don't attack us and we won't attack you. It's help us or we'll attack you. Support us or we'll attack you. Prop us up or we'll attack you. It's an extortion racket. They don't want to pay the cost of their own sovereignty, so they make the threat not at those who would deny them sovereignty, but at those who can provide them sovereignty at a discount, who can shoulder the costs that they're not willing or able to shoulder on their own for them. And it's speculated that this might have influenced Nixon in 1973 to get involved on Israel's behalf during the Yom Kippur War. Because they were suffering some early reversals in that war. They were caught off guard. They were losing ground. Things looked pretty grim for a while. And they activated 13 nuclear weapons. Now, it's speculated that they activated these in a way to be obvious to American intelligence. And, officially this had nothing to do with the U.S.'s response, which was to initiate a massive airlift of supplies and material and munitions using the newly acquired C-5 Galaxy aircraft to supply Israel with thousands of tons of supplies, as well as, whole squadrons of combat aircraft. Military aid worth over $4 billion in modern terms. Officially, the nuclear weapons had nothing to do with that. But unofficially, especially in light of this Samson option that the Israelis haven't exactly kept under wraps, you have to wonder, why is such a little, seemingly unimportant country the subject of such inordinate focus? And a lot of it surely has to do with their skill at influence mongering, subversion, infiltration, things like that. But there's also this Samson option. It's the world's most parasitic nuclear power, the world's most parasitic sovereign nation. Because they don't assume the costs and the risks of sovereignty themselves. Right? Their threats of retaliation are not directed against those who threaten their sovereignty, but against those who refuse to provide them with sovereignty at a discount. Always looking for discounts. Israel, the parasite nation. So, as tension builds over Syria and around Syria, ask yourselves, is this little parasite nation worth getting into a major confrontation with Russia over? A major confrontation with Iran over? I don't think so. You know, and speaking as an American, it may be different for Europe. I'd be perfectly willing to risk the Samson option. I mean, if they hit us, what are they going to hit? They're going to hit our cities. They're going to hit our urbanites. They're going to hit our degenerates. They're going to hit our diversity. I don't care about that shit. You know, I'd say let them and get it over with. Let's be done with it. We can rebuild. But, you know, Israel's not existentially threatened at the moment. Not by Syria. Not by anything in their immediate neighborhood. Maybe by their own internal problems. Maybe by their own, internal demographics. Whether it's the non-Jewish demographics or whether it's, particular subsets of the Jewish demographics that don't contribute to their commons or their defense or their tax base or anything like that. You know, that's the only existential threat they're facing at the moment. Not anything from Syria. So it doesn't seem likely that the Samson option is on the table right now. It's an ace up their sleeve. It's something they've talked about in the past. It's something they've let slip in the past. But you know what? I say cut them loose. We've fought enough wars for Israel. We've given enough aid to Israel. Cut them loose. Let them fend for themselves. If they can't hack it, we'll eat their nukes. We'll fucking eat them and we'll return them with interest. That's my opinion. I don't care about the urbanites. If Israel wants to crush our urbanites, after we retaliate, we'll mourn them appropriately. Maybe I'm being dismissive and blasé about all this, but I'd say, that's not the kind of behavior or the kind of attitude that I feel like we should be rewarding. I just don't. I just don't think there's any point in rewarding that kind of behavior by giving them what they want. So, let them do their worst, and, we'll take it as it comes.